Hey everyone, welcome. In this explainer, we're going to peek behind the curtain of literally the world's most successful tech brand. When we think of Apple today, we think of sleek iPhones, super powerful MacBooks, and absolute market dominance. But getting to the top of that mountain involves a whole lot of falling down. So today, we're exploring Apple's epic graveyard of gadgets. We're going to break down their biggest historical failures, look at the fascinating data behind them, and see exactly what went wrong.
I mean, seriously, think about it for a second. Did you know Apple actually built a gaming console, like to compete with the PlayStation? Or how about a portable laptop that weighed a back-breaking 7 kilos? Or, and this one is wild, a computer that got so insanely hot it literally melted its own internal chips. It sounds like fiction, I know, but I assure you it is completely factual tech history.
All right, let's just dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at Apple's expensive early stumbles, the confused 90s gadgets, form over practical function, modern tech misfires, and finally, the ultimate takeaway.
So, starting us off, Apple's expensive early stumbles. Let's step back into the super ambitious but honestly deeply flawed 1980s era. Right after the massive success of the Apple II, they released some machines with just jaw-dropping price tags. The Apple III launched in 1980 for business users, and it cost up to $7,800. If we adjust that for inflation to rupees, we're talking about an equivalent of around 75 lakhs today. Then you've got the Apple Lisa in 1983. It pioneered the graphical user interface, sure, but it launched at an eye-watering $10,000. Consumers instantly rejected them. I mean, you just couldn't convince everyday people to spend the equivalent of a luxury car on a desktop computer.
And you know what? That insane price wasn't even the worst part. The Apple III had some genuinely fatal design flaws. Steve Jobs was famously obsessed with sleek, completely silent designs, so he insisted the machine have absolutely zero cooling air vents. Zero. The result? An absolute thermal nightmare. The machine constantly overheated and crashed. It got so incredibly hot inside that aluminum case that the internal chips would actually expand and pop right out of their sockets. And the floppy disk drives, they literally melted. Just a complete disaster.
So, unsurprisingly, this led to massive financial damage. Apple took a cool $1 million loss on the Apple III alone. It was really their first major financial stumble, and honestly, a pretty harsh lesson that you absolutely cannot defy the laws of thermodynamics just to make a computer look pretty.
Moving right along to Chapter 2, the confused 90s gadgets. This period is often called Apple's dark age. Steve Jobs had actually left the company, and without his laser focus, Apple suffered this massive identity crisis. The Macintosh TV in 1993 perfectly captures how confused they were. The vision was incredible, right? An all-in-one home TV and PC hybrid, complete with a remote control, aiming to completely dominate the living room. But the reality? The hardware was super weak, and bizarrely, you couldn't actually use the TV and the computer functions at the same time. You either watch TV or you use the Mac. Add a ridiculous $2,000 price tag to that, and yeah, it's no wonder this thing completely bombed.
And speaking of the living room, in 1996, Apple released the Pippin. It was a $599 gaming console meant to take on Sony and Nintendo. Want to guess how many they sold? 400. A shockingly low 400 units. Why? Well, the game library was virtually non-existent, the performance was awful, and Apple's marketing was just so confusing that literally nobody knew if it was a console, a computer, or a web browser.
Apple's pricing strategies in the 90s were just as chaotic. Take the 20th anniversary Mac. It was supposed to be this huge luxury showpiece, featuring custom audio and literal leather palm rests on the keyboard. It launched in 1997 for an unbelievable $7,500. Sales were so incredibly bad that they had to violently slash the price down to $3,500 and then eventually all the way down to $2,000 by March 1998 just to get rid of the inventory. Turns out, leather palm rests couldn't save a weak, ridiculously overpriced computer.
Now, we really can't talk about Apple's 90s struggles without bringing up the ironically named Macintosh Portable. 7 kilograms. That is how much this quote-unquote portable laptop weighed.
Just to put that massive weight into perspective for you, 7 kilos is the maximum cabin baggage weight limit on almost all modern flights. If you tried to travel with just this one laptop today, you would entirely max out your carry-on luggage allowance. It was honestly way less of a portable laptop and much more of a computer you could, aggressively drag from one room to another.
But amazingly, the weight wasn't even its biggest flaw. The power design was just fundamentally broken. It used a heavy lead-acid battery, kind of like what you'd find in a car, If that battery fully drained, it completely died and often couldn't even be revived. And here's the absolute kicker. The wall charger didn't actually bypass the battery. It only charged the battery. So if your battery died, plugging it into the wall did absolutely nothing. You literally couldn't use it. Oh, and to top it all off, that super expensive LCD screen didn't even have a backlight, making it totally impossible to use in low light.
So the crucial point here is that Apple had these huge dreams but totally lacked the hardware to back them up. The Newton message pad from 1993 perfectly captures this. Apple's goal was super visionary. They wanted a futuristic smart assistant to replace paper diaries and completely revolutionize mobile computing. It was basically the grandfather of the iPhone. But the actual user experience? Pure agony. It was thick, the hardware was incredibly slow, and that heavily marketed handwriting recognition was so delayed and wildly inaccurate that it became an actual running joke. When Steve Jobs eventually returned to Apple, the Newton was one of the very first projects he ruthlessly canceled.
All right, Chapter 3. Form over practical function.
So Jobs returned in the late 90s, and Apple totally found its identity again. But occasionally, their massive aesthetic ambition completely ruined practical usability. Just imagine trying to use a mouse where you have to constantly ask yourself, wait, which way is forward? In 1998, Apple released the USB hockey puck mouse alongside the stunning iMac G3. It was perfectly round. And because it was perfectly round, the absolute second you took your hand off it, you lost all orientation. You couldn't feel which way was up. It was an ergonomic disaster. It's a classic case of designing for an art museum rather than designing for the actual human hand, and it was quickly scrapped within just 2 years.
Let's see how this trend built into their broader computer lineup with the Power Mac G4 Cube. Visually, an absolute masterpiece. It was a super compact computer suspended in this gorgeous crystal clear acrylic. But sales completely tanked. Apple expected to sell 300,000 units, they only sold about 150,000, missing their goal by exactly half. Why did it fail? Because that beautiful, compact design resulted in weak thermals, really low performance, and a massive price tag. People absolutely loved looking at it, but professionals definitely didn't want to actually work on it.
Next up, Chapter 4. The Modern Tech Misfires.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, okay, that was a long time ago. Apple has it all figured out now, right? But no. Even hyper-successful modern Apple still makes spectacular mistakes. Take the iPod Hi-Fi from 2006. Apple wanted to completely dominate your living room audio, so they built this massive, bulky dock for the iPod. But they priced it at a staggering $350. At that price point, consumers expect a fully feature-rich system. The iPod Hi-Fi entirely lacked basic stuff that its cheaper competitors had, like a simple built-in radio. It was rapidly discontinued because it just couldn't compete with much more functional third-party speakers.
And then we have arguably the most infamous modern failure of all, AirPower's tragic timeline. Step 1. In 2017, Apple proudly announces a revolutionary wireless charging mat where you could drop your iPhone, Apple Watch, and AirPods literally anywhere on the surface to charge them all simultaneously. Step 2. Total radius silence, followed by a massive 18-month delay. Turns out the complex multi-coil design was generating way too much heat. And finally, Step 3. On March 29, 2019, Apple officially canceled the product before it even launched. It is exceptionally rare for Apple to announce new hardware and then publicly kill it just because they couldn't get the physics to match their own thermal standards.
When we connect the dots across all these failures, a pretty clear pattern emerges. We can call it the Jobs factor. Apple's most chaotic, unfocused eras, like the Macintosh TV and the Pippin, happened when Steve Jobs left the company. There was just a total lack of clear vision. When he came back, he aggressively killed off the dead weight and brought back that laser focus. Yet, even with great leadership, the drive to constantly push boundaries meant that failures still happened.
Which brings us to Chapter 5, the ultimate takeaway.
We've had some laughs today at the melting computers and the 7-kilo laptops, but what can we actually learn from studying these massive tech blunders? Well, when you look back at all these mistakes, a core truth really emerges. Failure is just an inevitable step in building great things. Even the biggest tech company in the world stumbled to get to the top. Every single failure we've looked at in this explainer, from the Newton to AirPower, was a direct symptom of ambition. Innovation inherently requires taking massive risks, pushing the envelope, and accepting that sometimes, despite billions of dollars and brilliant engineers, things just aren't going to work out.
And that brings me to the final question I want to leave you with today. If the world's most valuable tech company isn't afraid to put out a complete dud, iterate, learn, and try again, why should you be?
Don't let the fear of a misfire stop you from building something absolutely great. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep innovating out there, and I'll see you in the next one.